Every cup of Nespresso coffee is an invitation to transform your morning routine into a ritual you can treasure each and every day. Using the Virtuo Pup, a simple touch of the button freshly brews bold aromas and a rich, velvety crema layer for delicious cafe-quality coffee at home. Whether you enjoy your coffee hot or over ice, every sip, every morning is unforgettable. Nothing tastes like Nespresso coffee. Visit Nespresso.com or our app to explore our full range of easy-to-use machines and coffees not found anywhere else.
Entering a realm between the hidden and forgotten, a slipstream caught between realities, a secret museum of the esoteric, the private library of shadows, all taking place in a world forged from mystery and caught between logic and myth. You are entering Parareality.
Hello and welcome to the mysterious world of Parareality, a reality where the unknown meets the unexplained and everything is a mystery. I'm Sandman, and I'm your host. Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for tuning in tonight. It's time for another episode of your favorite paranormal podcast, Parareality. I got another great episode in store for you tonight, and I'm just going to get right into it, man, because I'm excited about this episode. You know, since you listen to this podcast and others like it, I'm sure that it's crossed your mind more than once about what happens to us when our time on this earthly plane is done. I know I've certainly have. As a matter of fact, I do it quite frequently. Do we continue to exist in some form? I'm sure that we do, because how else can we explain things like spirits, hauntings, and communication with the dead? Does our soul just wander about in the universe, or does it hang around here on this earthly plane in some sort of other dimension that we can't see, the living can't see? Well, my guest tonight just might have the answers to those burning questions and a few more. His name is Mark Ireland, and he is an author, researcher, and co-founder of Helping Parents Heal, an organization providing support to bereaved parents all over the world. He has actively participated in mediumship research studies conducted by esteemed institutions, including the University of Arizona and the University of Virginia. As a leading figure in the field, he operates a medium certification program. Mr. Ireland is the author of 3 books, his current one being The Persistence of the Soul, Mediums, Visitations, and Afterlife Communication, and he currently resides in Camas, Washington. His book, The Persistence of the Soul, isn't merely just a collection of personal anecdotes. It's a meticulously researched compilation of scientific experiments conducted to provide irrefutable evidence of the persistence of consciousness. Mr. Ireland's own experiment involving a secret message from his deceased sister, Robin, stands as a testament to the reality of afterlife communication. Mr. Ireland, in his book, counters skeptical arguments with compelling evidence and delves into the intersection of mediumship with diverse religious traditions. Tonight, I'll be sitting down with Mr. Ireland and talking about his books and what happens to us after we die, of course, his nonprofit organization, Helping Parents Heal, and so much more. But of course, to learn all of that, you'll have to tune in, and find out. But before we get him on the podcast, time for one of my favorite segments. I'd like to introduce some new followers, welcome some new followers to the Parareality podcast. So, I have a history of just massacring people's usernames and their real names and all that. So I'm going to try to do the best I can here. These are pretty easy today, so keep your fingers crossed. So welcome new followers, Stella Cutie, Tuba Khan 693, and Atlas Absurd. Once again, Stella Cutie, Tubacan 693, and Atlas Absurd. Thank you all three for the follow and for being loyal listeners of the podcast. I hope all of you find this podcast unique, informative, and entertaining. If you combine all of my social media accounts, I've got over 2,000 followers. So if you're listening to this podcast, please be sure to follow me on my socials so you can keep up with all the latest going-ons with Parareality. My social media accounts are where you can get you get a little bit more intimate look into the podcast as well as me as a person. So it's a little bit more intimate side of Parareality. So if you're not already following, I'll be giving you the deets on how you can do that later on in the podcast.
So good, so good, so good.
Get ready, because it's time to save at your Nordstrom Rack store. Now through February 23rd, take an extra 40% off red tag clearance boots, jackets, and sweaters. We're talking the best cold weather styles from Vince, Cole Haan, Sam Edelman, and more. All on sale for even less. All sales final. You never know what you'll find, but you know it's gonna be so good. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
In a world where the mysteries of the afterlife have intrigued humanity for centuries, author and researcher Mark Ireland unveils a remarkable journey of discovery in his latest book, The Persistence of the Soul, Mediums, Visitations, and Afterlife Communication. Drawing upon personal experiences and rigorous scientific investigations, Mr. Ireland presents a groundbreaking exploration into the realm of the beyond, shedding light on the existence of life after death. His book not only provides us insights into the mechanics of mediumship, but also offers solace and healing to those grappling with grief. Mark's encounters with mediums offer profound insights into the ways in which spirit communication can guide and console those who have lost someone near and dear to them. His interviews with mediums shed light on the intense process through which they receive messages from the other side, demystifying the profound connection between the living and the departed. His exploration into the afterlife extends beyond his book's pages. As a co-founder of Helping Parents Heal, an organization supporting bereaved parents worldwide, he brings his insights to a community in need. He has actively participated in mediumship research studies conducted by esteemed institutions like the University of Arizona and the University of Virginia. Furthermore, he spearheads a medium certification program fostering a new generation of spiritual communicators. Everybody, my special guest tonight is Mr. Mark Ireland. It's a pleasure to have you here, Mr. Ireland. Welcome to the Parareality podcast.
Well, thanks so much. I don't know if I could live up to that intro, but I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Well-deserved accolades there. The work that you're doing with Helping Parents Heal and the Medium Certification Program, which we're going to get into that later. I think that's wonderful stuff that you're doing, especially with the Helping Parents Heal. As someone myself who I haven't lost a child, but I lost a father at a very young age, so I can understand the grief, and I understand, the need to be able to talk to someone who can understand. So that's a big thing for me. So I'm very impressed with that.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. So let's get right into it here, Mark. Is it okay if I call you Mark?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. All right, Mark. So your father is Dr. Richard Ireland, who was a pretty gifted psychic in his own right. And his abilities included things like clairvoyance, precognition, spirit communication, and something that I'm not really too familiar with, but it's called X-ray clairvoyance. Did you inherit any abilities from your father, or did he train you to be a medium in any way?
Well, first off, X-ray clairvoyance was his term for what would be called today remote viewing, essentially. Okay. But in terms of my own abilities, my dad always said I was psychic, but I never really thought that I was, like, in comparison with his abilities. Not many of us want to grow up to be like our parents. So I kind of took a different path. But I have definitely had some instances where it's kind of revealed itself in different ways. So I think it's there. It does follow family lines from what a lot of parapsychology researchers have found. Mm-hmm. So it does make sense that you would wonder whether I would have those abilities or not. I'll give you a couple examples. And again, this has been sporadic for me, not like my dad where it's a day-to-day thing.
Okay.
Early one was when I was 18 or 19 years old. I had a girlfriend, and I had a dream one night that she was seeing another guy. And then the next day I mentioned the dream to her, and she says, well, tell me more. And I said, no, it's just a dream. And she goes, no, please tell me. So I said, okay, well, I was jealous because you were seeing this other guy. And then I described him physically, his size and weight, hair color, all that. And I said his name was Bob Dooley. And she said, whoa. She goes, I used to date a guy named Bob Dooley when I lived in Kansas, and he looked just like he described. So, but more recently, there was a 3-year stint where I was invited to speak at a church in San Francisco called the Golden Gate Spiritualist Church. Mm-hmm. This church was founded by a woman named Florence Becker, who, by all accounts, was similar to my father in her abilities. I think she was founded it in 1924, and I believe she passed in like 1970 or thereabouts. So for these 3 years in a row, I was invited to go there to do a talk. And each time I brought a medium friend, Tina Powers from Tucson. She's very gifted, very kind person. And she would give messages to the congregation. So anyhow, this one particular time, she encouraged me and said that she felt I would get a message, and asked me if I'd share it with people. And I said, sure, if I do, I will. Yeah. Not really thinking about it. She kept hounding me about this over and over again. Even the day walking into the church, she's like, Mark, if you get a message, will you share it? I'm like, well, sure. If I get something, I will. Yeah. So I went in about 30 minutes before I was due to talk and sat in their healing room on a bench for a organ or piano, and then shut my eyes, kind of quietly meditated. More than anything, I was just trying to prepare to do my talk. Mm-hmm. But while I was sitting there, this name popped into my awareness, and it was Max. And then immediately after that, I got Maxine. I thought, oh, maybe it's Maxine and not Max. I didn't hear it. I didn't see it. It just came like an idea would come to you, or a thought drifting in, or a memory, or something like that. Yeah. So when it came time for my talk, I at the end of it, I said, Tina made me promise if I got anything, I'd share it with the congregation. So I have to ask if the names Max or Maxine mean anything to anyone here. And the pastor of the church, his jaw dropped, and he's like, well, Max and Maxine were twins that were born to the church founder, Florence Becker. They were delivered stillborn, and they grew up in spirit on the other side. Wow. He says, I think we know who is here right now, meaning Becker, obviously. Yeah. And then after the service, he says, I want to show you something. And he took me upstairs and showed me a painting that I believe Florence Becker had actually done. It was a landscape painting, and it had a long winding road. And at the end were these two little figures. He says, that's Max and Maxine. So I could then see why Tina encouraged me to share that, because it was so subtle. I could have easily dismissed it as not being pertinent to anything. Yeah. But yet it turned out to be very significant. Really long out. I mean, those are not common names, and to get two of them was pretty remarkable. Wow. So that's an example of some things that have happened to me, but again, not like my father, where it's a daily thing, but I've not really sought to develop it, nor did he try and teach me. He just let me be my own person. And how old were you when you realized that you had these latent abilities? Well, I guess, like I said, it's been sporadic, but, at that age of 18 or 19 was one of the earlier ones. I think I probably had other things happen before that I'm not remembering. Yeah. But it's probably always there. I think all of us have it to some degree. It just varies to what degree we have it innately, and then do we seek to develop it or not?
Right. Well, let's kind of shift gears here for a second. And I want you to tell my listeners about your organization, Helping Parents Heal, because, like I said, that's something that I think is very important. So that you're doing. So
after my first book, which is called Soul Shift: Finding Where the Dead Go, after Soul Shift came out, I was doing a talk one day, and during a break, a woman came up to me and she said, "Hey, I just moved from Florida here to Arizona, and I came to your event because I wanted to meet like-minded people." She says, "I'm actually a medium." Her name's Suzanne Wilson. She's actually a very gifted medium. And we were talking a bit. She goes, "It's rather ironic that your son passed while climbing a mountain, because I just met another woman whose son passed in mountains as well. It was in the Himalayas." So I said, "Well, here, give her a copy of my book as a gift, and here's my contact info if she wants to talk." So it was only a couple of days later, I think, that I got this call from this woman, Elizabeth Boyson. So Suzanne had passed the book on to her, and Elizabeth says, "Hey, I read your book in one sitting or two sittings, I can't remember. But she says, I loved it, and I want to meet you and your wife." So we got together with her, and we started talking, and she told us a little bit about her son, and the fact that she'd started a Facebook group called Parents United in Loss, which was just online only. But she said she was going to hold her first in-person meeting in North Scottsdale or Cave Creek area, and asked me if I'd be her speaker for her first meeting. I said, sure. So we did that a couple weeks later, and I think she had 30 to 40 people there, and it went pretty well. And then she started having these meetings once a month. Well, fast forward to late 2011, because that was probably early 2010 or something like that. End of 2011, I was speaking to that Tina Powers, so the medium I mentioned before, and she said to me, "Mark, I think your real mission in life is to help other parents who have been through what you've been through, and maybe you could think about starting an organization to do that."
Yeah.
So I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel here, because what Elizabeth put together with her group is great, but it's the only limitation is it's just one location, and she doesn't have a website, and she doesn't have a newsletter. So I decided to call her. I said, "Hey, Elizabeth, would you have any interest in partnering with me to take your organization that you started to a new level, where we could work together to blueprint what your meetings are like and how you conduct those, and then see if we can get other affiliates set up in other locations, other cities. And I can help you put together a website," which I did, and also a newsletter, which I did, and then maybe a different name, like Helping Parents Heal. She goes, "Oh, I love that name. I didn't like the name Parents United in Loss because it sounded like a downer,
Yeah.
And so that's what really started it. And then the people who had been coming to the initial meetings became our board members. And then it didn't take off real strong immediately, but once it gained steam, it just went crazy. And we now have 31,000 members, 165 affiliates worldwide, and we conduct a conference every other year that draws about 1,100 people. So it's become a big deal and brought a lot of healing. And at the conferences I've had, I'd say a number of people approach me and say, "Hey, I wanted to thank you. You saved my life." So I don't know if they're referring to the organization or the books that I put out, or both. But it really, when you get that kind of feedback, that you've been involved in something that was very important,
Absolutely,
and very healing and helpful for people.
Yeah, that's wonderful that it has picked up and taken off like that. Is Nancy? Is she still involved?
Elizabeth,
yes, sorry.
Of the organization.
Okay.
Yeah, Elizabeth Boyson's the president. Irene Buvalides joined us. She's the vice president. They run the day-to-day operation. I'm the chairman of the board, so that's more of an oversight role. And for direction of the organization on the whole. But they run the organization day to day, and it's a lot of work. They work long hours.
Yeah, I bet. Well, that's like I said, what you and Elizabeth paired up to do is an amazing thing, and I'm so glad for you and for everyone that you've been able to help, that it is as big as what it is. So congratulations on that. I know it's been a long, hard road and a lot of hard work. So congratulations.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a shame that we're needed, but it's a good thing that we're there for people that do need it.
So true. Now, you had mentioned your books, and Persistence of the Soul is the third book that you've published. Not the third book you've written, but the third book you've published. So tell us a little bit about what is Persistence of the Soul. Tell us, what's behind it and why you decided to write it.
Sure. So Soul Shift was my first book, and it was kind of my journey, my memoir of all the experiences I had after my son Brandon passed, and really my re-entry into my dad's field to look at evidence for the continuity of consciousness after physical death, and to connect with my son, which, there's a lot of that detailed in that book. The second book I had published was actually a book that my dad wrote that I didn't even know existed. It's called Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development. And that book, what had happened was I ended up getting a reading from Alison Dubois back in 2004, which before she was a big name, or the show Medium had come out, which publicized her name. And 2 weeks before meeting her, a man gave me a box, and inside the box was a full manuscript, 8.5 by 11 type pages, called Your Psychic Potential. And he handed it to me, and I'm like, where'd you get this? And he says, well, your dad gave it to me before he passed because you were out of state at the time. And I said, well, why are you giving this to me now? He passed 12 years ago. And he goes, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to.
Wow.
And then 2 weeks later, I met with Alison Dubois. And one of the first things she said to me was, your father's here, and he showed me a book, but I believe it's his book, and he's handing it to you to take forward. Does that make sense? And so I understood what that meant. And then I was able to get that book published in 2011. But the new book, The Persistence of the Soul, is a deeper dive into this whole subject matter to really provide not only personal experiences, because the personal narrative is still there of my experiences, but then the research and science that backs them up. So that's what I try to do, is kind of two books in one. It's still, the personal journey, the personal experiences, but also for those who are more analytical or open-minded skeptics, they would appreciate, I think, the research there that dives a little bit deeper into those phenomena and what they're all about. Because this stuff's been studied for well over 100 years, going back, actually even before the founding of the Society for Psychical Research in London, which started in 1882. That's, I'd say, when formal studies really took off, but there was research done even before then.
And it sounds like you put a lot of yourself into the writing of these two books. Do you recommend reading them in order, or can I just, if I just happen to pick up Persistence of the Soul, do I need to, is it a standalone book, or do I need to read the first one?
It's great if people could read Soul Shift first, but you don't have to, because what I really do in the opening of the book of Persistence of the Soul, I give the background. So you're kind of caught up in a very abbreviated way. So you're not starting without an understanding of everything that led to that.
Okay. And I want to ask you a little bit. Now, this is a little bit of a delicate subject, but you've mentioned a couple of times that you had a son that died at a very young age as a result of an asthma attack, I believe, right? And are you able to communicate with him? Are you still able to have some sort of open line?
Yeah, it's not something that I seek to do all the time. I do think about him every day, and I pray for him every day. But at times I'll quietly shut my eyes and sit down and just think of him, and I'll feel like a rush of energy. And sometimes he comes to me in dreams. But even beyond that, I still have, now I know all these mediums that are high quality, high caliber mediums that just spontaneously give me messages from him. So an example is a really top-notch medium, Farrah Gibson. When I first met her in person, I'm thinking this is probably 9 months to a year ago, we went out to dinner with another friend. And while we're sitting there, I mentioned to her that, Brandon, my son, was a bass player. And then all of a sudden she says, okay, he's here. And he says, but his new one had an extra string, which was ironic because it was true. His initial bass was a 4-string bass, but just for his last birthday, 6 months or less before he passed, he wanted a new bass with 5 strings, and we bought him that. So that was pretty specific, ironic, and not anything that's ever could be researched or anything like that.
Yeah, that was something
then she had also mentioned, she goes, well, he's also showing me you like taking the strings off of a guitar or restringing it. And just a couple of days prior to that, I had visited another friend in Prescott, Arizona, and we were walking downtown, and she walked into this music store, and she apparently had this guitar. She didn't tell me she had a guitar that needed restringing. And she asked the guy at the store if they did that. And he says, oh, yes. I said, you don't need to do that. Let me just buy you a set of strings and I'll do it for you. So I had actually took all the strings off her guitar and restrung it. So those were two, pretty cool things. And so I get that kind of stuff all the time from the people I know who have that ability too.
That's wonderful that you're able to, from time to time, just have just those brief little moments of interaction. I hope that helps to bring you some peace and everything. Cause I'm
pretty well adjusted after all these years, but it is nice, cause it's really the idea of continuity of that relationship. It's just different than, obviously than when he was here in a physical body, but just to know that there's still a love connection there.
Yeah. True that. And, I've had so many people use the term, time heals all wounds. And I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I don't necessarily think that your wounds heal. But time does, make you able to cope with them, with stuff like that better, And
my uncle once told me, he says, you'll always have a hole in your heart for that. But
definitely,
I can attest to the fact that you can go on in life and experience joy again and have a fulfilling life. The day that it happened, I wondered if that was possible, but it wasn't too long after that I found that it's true, that you can continue on. You will have that hole in your heart, but you can have other things fill the hole to some extent too, and have a meaningful life.
Yeah. That's very true. Very poignant. Very poignant. I know that's, like I said, a delicate topic, and I appreciate you taking the time to address that with me for just a moment.
Sure.
You, how are we related to the energy that's out there in the universe, both when we're alive and when we're dead?
Well, I think, we're energetic beings at our core. I think we're a soul, whatever that is. We're basically consciousness that's currently wrapped in a physical body, and that consciousness is filtered through a brain that is a temporary vehicle for experiencing this world and coordinating with the 5 physical senses that we have while we're here. But I think we're more than that. That soul is what carries on, that eternal part of us, that personal energy, whatever term you choose. That's my opinion. There's a lot of evidence that consciousness is not, the brain doesn't generate consciousness, rather, but it's a sifter or filter of it. For one, the observer effect in quantum mechanics, which has demonstrated repeatedly without fail that mind affects matter. So if mind affects matter, then the two must not be the same thing. And it also points to me like mind came first. Mind was before matter, and mind is the master of matter, if you will.
Okay. That's very interesting. So being someone who can, and you may not be able to answer this, but if there's someone who can pick up on the energies or speak to those of us who have crossed over into the other side, how can we differentiate, or how can that person differentiate between that and, say, something that maybe is out there who's never really had a corporal body? Or is there even such a thing?
And I can't prove what I'm saying, but what I would say is I think the best evidence for that is when someone comes through with evidential information and a sense of love and purpose that ties to a living person, and no one else knows that information other than the person who died and the person who's receiving the information, that to me is solid evidence. especially in cases where it's delivered through a third party. Like I've been a proxy for those, not by intention, but where a medium gave a message to me for someone else that was a friend of mine whose brother had just died. And I knew none of the information that was given to me, whether it was accurate or not, but then later passed it on and found out it was 100% accurate.
Wow.
So I think that would be one thing. So if there are other beings of some sort, I don't know how they would have all that information at their disposal. How would they be all-knowing beings, in other words? How would they be able to do that? And also the sense of love and healing. If something that's more of a more negative bent is not going to want to help somebody heal or feel better or be more positive or have a greater faith in a greater power. So that's what I would say to that question.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Thank you for answering that for me. Unfortunately, it is time for us to take another brief commercial break. So we'll be right back after this.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
All right, welcome back. Speaking with Mr. Mark Ireland, who is the author of, forgive me if I don't say the whole title of your book, okay. The Persistence of the Soul. And Mr. Ireland is able to, not only is he able to have some psychic and mediumship abilities, but he is also heavily involved in helping the parents of children who have died unexpectedly, who they've had a loss of a child. He's very heavily involved in helping them cope with their grief. And he's also, you've got a psychic mediumship certification program, which we have talked about. Very interesting stuff. And I was, during the commercial break, I was thinking about some of the things that we had talked about prior to. And one of the things that popped into my head was just based off, because I had asked you about how we're related to the energy that's out in the universe, and both when we're alive and dead, and can people communicate with things that maybe weren't even alive in the first place? And during the commercial break, I just had this pop into my head. I'd actually forgotten all about this until we were having our conversation. And it involves near-death experiences. And I think that you touch on that during your book, in your book. But when I was a kid, my maternal grandmother was involved in a horrible car accident that just about killed her. She had it was some people were drag racing, and it was at night, and it was on the backcountry roads. They didn't have their headlights on, and she didn't see them, and pulled out in front of them as they were drag racing down this backcountry road, and got hit and almost killed. And it was a while before anybody even knew the accident happened, because it was later at night, and it was, so far out in the backcountry there. And she, anyway, not to get too much behind the scenes of that, but she had to have multiple surgeries, and she was in a coma for several days, spent a very, very long time in the hospital. They didn't even think that she was going to survive. And sometime during all of this, she had a near-death experience. And she told my mother about it one time, I believe, and my mother told me that she had this experience, but I never could get my grandmother to talk to me about it. I tried a couple of times to ask her about it, so I really don't know what all it involved. But a lot of people will say that near-death experiences are nothing more than like a misfiring of the brain synapses. Like she was in a coma, so her brain wasn't functioning properly at this point in time. And, usually when people have these near-death experiences, it's not like I'm just walking down the road and all of a sudden I have a near-death experience. It usually involves some sort of, trauma, or maybe you're lying on the operating table or something like that, And so a lot of people will say that it's just a misfiring of the brain synapses. And what's your response to that?
I've actually interviewed Dr. Pim van Lommel from the Netherlands. He's one of the top researchers in the field. Mm-hmm. And he's observed cases of people who had cardiac arrest when the heart completely stopped. There was no brain activity and no brainstem activity whatsoever. And then these people would come back and describe these intricate experiences. And there's another researcher, Dr. Jeffrey Long, who's compiled a database of these to show the overlap of what are the common experiences people have, which mm-hmm. range from out-of-body experience, floating above their body, physical body, meeting deceased loved ones, and or a being of light or a Christ-like figure or a Buddha-like figure, depending on their cultural background, mm-hmm. going through a tunnel towards a white light,
right.
going into another realm, seeing colors they've never seen, feeling being engulfed by love. So many of these are common aspects of the near-death experience. So number one, I'd say, if Dr. Pim van Lommel says, if there's absolutely no brain or brainstem activity, how would you generate consciousness through a brain that's not functioning? Mm-hmm. I think the other one, because some people that want to debunk it will say, well, you don't know when that happened. Like maybe it all happened just at an instance when the brain was back online or just before it went out or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think then the stronger argument to that is, well, what about those who report veridical experiences? That is, they observe things while out of body that can be verified later. There's a case, the Pam Reynolds case, where she had an aneurysm in her brain that required the doctors to remove all the blood from her body and chill her body down to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, they removed the blood from her brain and her entire body during a period of 45 minutes, I believe it was, because it was too dangerous to operate on it otherwise. And then during this experience, when she had no blood in her brain or body, she had a detailed, a very substantial, significant near-death experience. And she came back after they put the blood back in her and warmed her body back up and got her heart going, exactly like the types of instruments that were used on her and the conversations that occurred in the operating room. But even beyond that, people then will still argue, well, maybe she was semi-conscious and she overheard these things. Well, there's a case of Anita Morjani, and she was in a deep coma, suffering from cancer. She was about to pass away, so they thought. She went out of body and went down a corridor well far away from the operating room where her body, or the room where her body was lying in a coma, and overheard a conversation between the doctor and her husband, where the doctor was explaining that your wife has a very short time to live and all these details about it. Mm. So she was later kind of miraculously, came through this and was healed too. So they had no explanation for the healing. And then she recounted that detailed conversation, and it was exactly accurate. Wow. So those would be my answers to someone who's questioning the validity of those near-death experiences.
But do you know where we're going after our time on this earthly plane of existence is over with?
Well, this is a matter of speculation, but from my father's perspective and from what I think makes the most sense is, I think it's like specific gravity. We gravitate towards wherever we're supposed to be at a soul level. So I think there's a gradation, and the higher levels of consciousness, someone like a Christ or a Buddha or someone of a higher consciousness will gravitate to the highest realms, perhaps to merge with the oneness of God, or whatever term you like to mm-hmm. call the primordial consciousness, the pure light. And then there are stages all along. So I think we're on an evolutionary track, not biological. Well, there's biological evolution, but I think there's a mm-hmm. soul evolution too, and it comes through experience and a heightening of love is expressed through charity, through your ability to have empathy and compassion, and those things are expressed. So, and I think, lower level people, like if you're a murderer or full of hate, you're going to be at a level where you're going to be with other people that are like you. I'm not saying a traditional hell-like place, but in a way it is, a place that you're naturally going to just because that's what you resonate with. So I think it's a frequency kind of thing. But I don't think anyone's ever stuck in any one level. And it's the whole idea that primordial consciousness wants. I think we were all sent out, and all the universe exists for experience, for that original consciousness to experience itself through tangible worlds and experiences. And maybe we're little pieces of that or puzzles, parts of that, and it all works together. Because I think there's a sense of oneness and interconnectedness too. And there's always a hope that those souls at a higher level will help work to pull those lower souls up, because they're still loved and cared about. So
you can still progress, even though you're not just stuck in that one level for eternity.
That's my sense. That's my belief.
Okay.
So I just don't think there's like this one big place called heaven and just everybody lands in this one place. So, but I also think the ability to communicate with those on the other side may vary depending on how far removed they are from that, as described by mediums that I've heard and talked to, that describe it's like a meeting in the middle. Mm-hmm. They have to raise their consciousness, and the spirit entity has to lower their consciousness and kind of meet in the middle. And beyond that, if someone's maybe higher levels up, I think they can come down, but I've heard that it's been told to me, souls can't necessarily go up and communicate or occupy different realms, but others higher can come down.
Okay.
So, I'm getting into a lot of areas of speculation here. These are my opinions based on what I think makes the most sense and what I've been told that resonates with me.
Yeah, I get it. And I'm glad that you took a second to address, what happens to those who weren't necessarily a good person. Cause that was going to be one of my follow-up questions, is what happens if you're not a good person, and you gave a perfectly plausible explanation for that. So, what do you have to say to those who are the skeptics?
Well, I spent a lot of time early on, and even in the book, The Persistence of the Skull, is to address the skeptics, but it's to address open-minded skeptics, because there's really true skepticism is the open-minded exploration of things unknown or unresolved. And it means you don't come in with a pre-existing dogmatic position, which the self-proclaimed skeptics, many of them have. They are atheistic materialists. They believe in physicalism. They think there's nothing but physical matter, and anything outside of that is hogwash. So, if they're already coming in, that's no different than a dogmatic religious belief that takes a perspective of their specific religion, said this is the only way, this is the only truth. Anything outside of this is not true, and I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to look at the evidence. And these other types of skeptics are the same way. So if somebody's that closed off, whether it be because they grew up in a fundamentalist religious household and they're rebelling against it, so they're trying to be the opposite of that, or for some other reason, or they're just stubborn. I can't, I think the only thing that will convince them is a personal experience of their own. And I think that is the ultimate teacher for folks, because you can read a book like mine, you can read books about near-death experiences, and it can be helpful to you. But it's usually when people have their own experience that kind of shakes them up and says, wow, maybe there is more to this than I realized.
Yeah.
But for those skeptics who are open-minded and are interested in it, looking at it, but just not sure of it, I'd say read a book like mine. Read books on near-death experiences. Read books about reincarnation research done by Dr. Ian Stevenson and others. Read books that are, focused on evidence for, the afterlife or the continuity of the soul, whatever. You could start there, and then you can look into it more deeply. You can try and develop your own meditative practice to see if you can have your own experiences. And some of those could happen spontaneously, like your dream visit or in a meditative state,
Good advice. Thank you. And what about, speaking of advice, do you have any advice for people who think that maybe they are a medium, or maybe they are a medium, but they don't have any training? Do you have any advice for people like that?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because someone in Hawaii just reached out to me because I already have this mediumship certification program. Mm-hmm. And she is interested in starting kind of a broader program, like an association of evidential mediums, that would involve an ethics agreement, that would involve training and development, that would involve certification.
Nice.
Kind of to bring a higher level of credibility to it. So I'm looking into that now. But I would say, right now, if someone's looking for development, to see if they really have the gift, and it can be refined. If someone has it naturally, I think that's the best thing.
Yeah.
Someone that just wants to develop it because they want to develop it and they've never had any experience, maybe that's not the path for them. Could be, but I'd say more likely if someone just was born with this and they feel it, and they've had experiences that provided evidence that was validated. That's the key thing. I mean, a lot of people can say, "Oh, I feel your grandmother here. She loves you very much," or whatever. But if you're able to deliver evidence that can be validated, I think that's the first sign that you're the real deal. So some of the folks that I know who do training and development programs, the top people would be like Gordon Smith, who's in Scotland, Suzanne Beastman, or Suzanne Wilson. Those are some names of people that have those types of programs of training. Folks interested in that.
Okay. And we're running out of time here, so I got two final questions. The first one is, where can my listeners find your books?
Okay, they're available, obviously, on Amazon. Everybody's got their books on
Everything's on Amazon.
Yeah, and Barnes & Noble, and independent bookstores, they can get it, because it is published to a major publisher, Intertraditions. But if they're going to order it online, I would just say go to my website. I've got links to all the retailers there, which again is markirelandauthor.com. And if they want to go to an independent bookstore, they just have to give them the title. If it's not on the shelf, they give them the title and order it through their independent bookstore.
Is it in like an e-reader format too?
Yes. It's, it has an e-format and paperback, both.
Great. And final question, and you kind of already touched on this a couple of times, but I always ask all of my guests pretty much the same question, depending on what your field of expertise is. So like I said, you've already touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If there's someone that's listening to this podcast who needs your help, maybe it's the parent or parents of, they've lost a child, or someone who just simply wants to contact you for whatever reason, how can they do it? Give us your website once again, and do you have any social media presence that we can follow? So
yes and yes. There's a contact page on my website. So if you go to the contact page, you can email me through the address shown there. Again, the website is markirelandauthor.com, Mark with a K, Ireland like the country, author, markirelandauthor.com. Go to the contact page. You'll find an email address where you can reach me. I'm sorry, what was the second half of the question?
Do you have any social media presence that we can follow?
Oh, yeah. And there's links to those on my website. Primarily Facebook. That's the main one. I'm on Twitter, or X as it's called now.
Whatever
I don't
is.
do a lot on that.
Yeah.
But I'd say Facebook is the primary one where you can follow me.
And it says, is it Mark Ireland on Facebook?
You know what? I think it's, I would just say go to the website and find the link to the Facebook page.
Okay, you got it. Yeah, I know it's difficult to keep up with. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for being on the podcast. Everybody, that's about does it for tonight's episode of Parareality. Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Mark Ireland, for coming on to the podcast. This was a really fascinating conversation, and one that we could have spent another hour just talking about all the things that were popping up into my head as you were answering my questions. Fascinating stuff.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Everybody, you can find his book, Persistence of the Soul, and his other works wherever books are sold, on Amazon as well. And if you are a parent who has lost a child and needs some help getting through this terrible time, please check out his organization, Helping Parents Heal. You can find them on the web at helpingparentsheal.org, or you can go to markirelandauthor.com, which is Mark's website, and you can find links to Helping Parents Heal. You can find links to his books. You can find a whole bunch of videos. You can find his social media presence. You can find everything you need to know about Mark Ireland. Thank you once again, Mark, for being on the show. And to my listeners, thank you for listening and for being a part of this podcast as well. And before I close it out, I got one more thing I want you to listen to.
You found your person. Now let the Knot help you with everything else. The Knot connects you to the wedding inspo, vendors, venues, and planning tools you need to make your day totally you. Having helped plan 25 million weddings, we've got your back when it comes to every little detail like RSVPs, budgets, and more. Because your wedding comes to life with the connections that matter the most. Get started at theknot.com/audio. The Knot. Let's plan your wedding together.
If you'd like to leave a comment about tonight's episode of Para Reality, have an idea for a topic you'd like me to cover, or a story you'd like to tell, send me an email, sandman@parareality.com, or call the Secret Bunker at 615-692-1170 and leave me a message. Don't forget that by leaving me your message, you're giving me permission to play your comment back on the podcast. Also, don't forget to follow Para Reality on social media. You can find the podcast on Facebook by looking for sandman.parareality, or you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram under the username @ParaRealRadio. You can also find Para Reality on YouTube under the username ParaReality1, and that's Para Reality with the number 1 out behind it. Parareality.com is the home of the podcast on the web, and it's also where you can find paranormal news from all around the world in the Para News section. And you can listen to past episodes in the archives section, all for the price of absolutely nothing. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can buy yourself some swag in the official Para Reality shop while you're there. You can also support the podcast for free by leaving me a 3-star or better review on whatever podcast app you're listening on. Your reviews help the podcast to grow and reach even more people, and I would appreciate it very much. I'd love to hear from you guys, so send me those emails. Thank you. Well, like I said, that about does it for tonight, everybody. Thank you for listening. I certainly hope that you enjoyed this fascinating interview with Mr. Mark Ireland. Be sure to check out his books, check out his website. Man, he is a fascinating guy, and I really learned a lot and really enjoyed sitting down talking with him. Once again, a special guest this evening, Mr. Mark Ireland. Everybody, the next episode will drop on Friday, March 7th. 2025 at 8:00 p.m. Central U.S. time. So make sure you turn on, tune in, and find out. I hope that this podcast opens up your mind to new ways of thinking, expands your consciousness, and produces a change in the way you see the world. If you wish to change, you must lift the veil of ignorance that has been cast over your eyes. Only then will you see the true power of the universe. I hope that you all have a wonderful evening, a great weekend, and I'll see you again on Friday, March 7th. Good night, everybody.
If you wish to change, you must first lift the veil of ignorance that has been cast over your eyes. Only then will you see the true power of the universe.
Hey, it's not over. Thanks for sticking around. I got something to tell you. Do you want to be a member of the Secret Sanctum? Well, if you do, there's only one way to do that. Somewhere on parareality.com is a link hidden in my website. And if you can find that link and click on it, you'll be granted access to the secret bunker, and you'll become a member of the secret sanctum. It's 100% free. It's not going to cost you anything. And once you become a member, you'll have access to some secret audio files and secret documents, some of which are exclusive only to Parareality and the members of the secret sanctum. You'll also get a free Parareality Secret Sanctum t-shirt. Just fill out the form and let me know what size you are, where you're located in your name, and I'll get that right out to you. So if you want to be a member of the Parareality Secret Sanctum and have access to the secret bunker, find the link.